let's come to the issue of democratization of schoolings and reduction of inequalities. On the left, it's my book, but it has not been translated in English, Governing the School Achievement, a Political Arithmetic of Inequalities. What I'm trying to study in this book is the way that the state, but some science of government, and particularly psychometry and economists and sociologists, conceptualize the measurement of inequalities and how they provide some advices on knowledge for national policymakers to advance some reforms on education on behalf of democratization and the reduction of inequalities. So it was a time, and the history began really in England in the 1920-30, but it has been copied largely by other states and national states in Europe, at least in France, in Nordic countries. In England, there was great hopes shared by leftist activists and leftist political groups to reduce a very early selection of students, because they were passing tests at the age of 7, and to extend the access of these working class students to secondary education and to higher education. So there was first consideration on first papers we were writing under the umbrella of the Labour Party in the 1920s, and it takes at least I will say 50 years to be successful in generalizing this democratization and this reduction of inequalities at national level in England, in creating the comprehensive school model, which has been spread over in Europe, but has some influence too in the United States. So there were great hopes shared by the leftist party and social movement. And it was linked at the beginning with some concern about the welfare states. What is often forgotten in this story of the global comprehensive school, or even by some English historians, that it was not only a response of the state in terms of education and reduction inequalities, but it was a response in terms of welfare, this development, this creation and development of the comprehensive schools. When you look at the birth of the comprehensive school itself in England, it has been advocated from concern about the wastage of human resources and investment in the human stock. Nobody can understand what it means, human stock, but at that time it was the notion of human capital was not so much developed. It's an invention by an economist whose name is Theodore Schultz. But the idea, which was largely backed in by the London School of Economics and Political Sciences, based on eugenicist views, was that give working class students to access to secondary and higher education would reduce the wastage of talents and will boost the economy and the wealth production. So it justifies the limitation of selection, not only on behalf of inequality of opportunities, but because at that time there was some discussion and concern about the decline of birth and fertility. And this decline of birth and fertility was considered as a threat for the economic development, and it was required from the state to trace and select talents among working class students to ensure a good social reproduction in human capital. So these ideas was developed later in France and in Nordic countries. So from the beginning, we can say that the fight against educational inequalities was linked to the issue of welfare, but also of demography. And through the development of a political arithmetic of inequalities, education has been considered as a social investment, as I've described in my first book, and it forged, to resume Laurent Thévenot's word, a compromise between the idea of social justice referring to civic worth on the idea of effectiveness, referring to the industrial worth that has been conceptualized in the book he has written with Luc Boltanski. So the idea of investing in human capital is not new, and it has been justified by the development of the welfare state in education. In the 1920s, the fact of giving social allowances for children was considered not only as a means of fighting against poverty, but it was a means of developing schooling on the way to limit the number of unfit working class children and to develop the work of women. So the issue of welfare was at the beginning very linked to the issue of education and the issue of health. We have forgotten that the welfare state has been built on two pillars, health policy and education policies. And sometimes you've got some, at least French social scientists who are studying the evolution of the welfare state or the welfare policies. They're looking at the evolution of the health policy, but they have completely forgotten education in the picture. And education must be put at the center of the picture. So at that time, from the 1920s to the 1930s, the planning of population to maintain its good quantity and quality was at the core of the debates opposing eugenicists and Malthusian representatives in England. There have been the same debate in France and also in Nordic countries. And you've got some reformists or progressive eugenists, conservative eugenicity. It was a very important debate with the idea of agreeing or disagreeing about the means, but about the ends of this welfare policy. So, but everybody, if they were disagreeing about the explanation of the decline of the population, in a way, they were agreeing about the idea to invest in the human stock. They were disagreeing in terms of means provided to the states to invest in the human stock through education. So education, since this period, has been linked with the idea of social investment. And later, after the Second World War, it has justified the planning policies through the building of social indicators, which should ensure well-being and equality for all. So in the 1950s, the planning in education was justified no more in terms of eugenicist views, because it has been largely criticized by sociologists, particularly, in fact, but it was justified in terms of the state needed to schedule the number of students moving to tertiary education or higher education, and the necessity to support the economic growth to develop an intermediary workforce for the economic growth. Perhaps it's for this reason that you work on intermediary professions in building the nomenclature and classification of statistics at the INSEE, Laurent. Redistribution, particularly through the social allowances, free meals, for example, in England, but also education compensatory programs were considered as the means to support this development and to reduce inequality of opportunities. So it was a time of the success of sociology of education as a science of government. We were speaking about Bourdieu this morning, capable to develop large-scale surveys to support education policy making.